An unknown force of disturbing power has its psychic tendrils wrapped tightly around Dr. Ava Jansen. The Doctor has been lured into a new region of the Dark Aether under its malignant influence. And this right here showcases one of the major issues with the Dark Aether story. And that may be a bit confusing. I just read some really story summary of what's going to be happening, right? But the problem is where is this story being told? Because I know some of the things here are things we've already known, that the Dark Aether entity has some sort of influence over Dr. Ava, and that she's looking for answers based off of the last cutscene we've seen when Ravnoff wouldn't give her any. But the new thing is that she's now just gone into the Dark Aether by herself. That is something we didn't know about, and I'd argue that's a major story beat. Like, it's the whole influence for the next major update for the game. And the problem with all of this is how they communicated this major story beat. You may think, well, maybe it's in an intro cutscene, outro cutscene, a quote, radio, cipher even, but no. Where we first learned about this was in none other than a blog post on the Call of Duty website. That's how they revealed a major story beat. And don't get it wrong here, like, obviously things have been revealed about a story outside of the game before, but the problem with this one is that I'd argue this is pretty important, and it probably would have been much better served as being revealed in the actual game. Like, they didn't even need to put this part. They could have just hinted at and been real cryptic about why we're going back into the Dark Aether. I mean, that's what they did with the old Aether storyline. They never told us anything straight up, and they could have done that. And then when we get the update, then that's when we find out that Jansen has gone into the Dark Aether by herself. We hear it through the quotes in the game. We see it in the game when we go into the Dark Aether ourselves. That is how you tell a story in video games. Like, imagine if this was like a movie or something and they just told you a major story beat in the promotional material. Like, that would be ridiculous, right? And I think that same logic should apply here. Or even a better example, like, bring yourself back to the launch of BO3. And in the Giant, we see Richtofen re-meet up with the rest of Primus and also kill an older version of himself. But what if that wasn't revealed through an intro cutscene, but instead just something in a blog post? To me, things like that is completely unacceptable, and it's one of the major reasons why I'm just kind of annoyed with how they've been telling this Dark Aether story. It's not just that, it's also how they just kind of over-explain everything. I alluded to this earlier, that the old Aether storyline wouldn't really explain much. Really, how I like to describe the old Aether storyline is that it was a storytelling of A blank and then C storytelling. And what I mean by that is that they only really show you the start of the story and the end of the story. They like leaving out chunks in between, and those chunks in between are theorized by the community and then slowly over time slowly revealed. And how many different examples of there is there? I mean, there's that gap between Origins and the Giant, like what was Richtofen doing in those years? Then also there's the blood vials too that everyone was so curious about. We knew we had the blood vials and we eventually knew what they were for, but we didn't know how. We didn't know how it ended up in that place. And to me, that is the reason why the Aether storyline was so community involved, because obviously, you could treat it like any story and just theorize about where you're going, right? Because obviously, by the start of a season compared to the end of the season, you slowly learn more and more, and you could theorize about what's coming up in the future, and you could do that with the Dark Aether story. But what's lacking is the mystery in between, trying to figure out how did we get here, or that why did we get here, right? Those things are missing from this story, and that's why you don't see the same community involvement of this story. It's something that the Aether storyline did so well, and now it's been completely lacking in this story. There's no mystery in between, and more than that, there's a major problem in the story of just over-explaining everything. I mean, if you think back even to Cold War, probably when the Dark Aether storyline was probably at its best, is that it was full of hours upon hours of radios, audio logs, and even more documents explaining every little thing and leaving no mystery for almost anything. Like there's only like one, two, maybe three questions going on right now, like what's going on with Project Janus or potentially with Richtofen's son and the bunny. Like besides that, there's no major questions and mysteries in the Dark Aether story. And that is a major problem for how the Aether storyline was told before. And unless they don't want to ever see that community interaction with the story, they need to stop over-explaining and doing dumb stuff like telling major story beats in blog posts. All of that is not how the Aether storyline told its story. And keep in mind here, I'm talking about storytelling. I am not talking about how they tell their story. I can't tell you how to tell a great story. That's up to you. If the story sucks, the story sucks. If it's great, it's great. But what my issue is here is how they choose to tell that story. And I know there's some major issues with the story that might slightly be out of the control of Treyarch and the storytelling team, because as we've seen with not only this year of Modern Warfare zombies, but also with Vanguard zombies, they were forced by Activision, or now Xbox, to go and just bring their story into other games and bring it into characters that never were supposed to be in the Dark Aether story. Surprisingly enough, I think that Vanguard actually wasn't as bad compared to Modern Warfare because, Vanguard didn't try to mix in any of the campaign characters like we see now with Modern Warfare. I mean, freaking Soap is for some reason a part of the zombie storyline now. Like stuff like that I just will never understand, and I try to overlook this stuff with these two in-between stories that really aren't the regular story, but it's hard to do that. But even if you do ignore that, the storytelling still has major issues with this game. And obviously there's the big ones like I've gone over, but there's even the smaller ones, having the lack of a playable crew, the lack of storytelling through the maps, because all the maps now are just reused from campaign, multiplayer, or Warzone. And I'd even argue things like the storytelling through music and ambience, and things that we first saw with maps like Verrückt and even saw perfected in maps like Mob of the Dead. But unfortunately, that's not where the Dark Aether story is. And I really hope it could go back to the same storytelling of the original Aether story, maybe with Treyarch's game that's launching later this year, but honestly, that's just not where we're at right now, and it just sucks seeing where the zombie storyline currently is. Something that I used to have so much passion and interest in, and now I just read about it in a blog post and maybe watch cutscene and never care about it again.